Ethan Cole had been riding the desert trails for 3 days straight, his weathered hands gripping the reins as his horse navigated the unforgiving terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly on his broad shoulders, and the silence of the wasteland pressed against his ears like a heavy blanket. He was a man carved from the harsh landscape itself, tall, lean, with deep lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting against the desert glare. His ranch lay somewhere behind him, abandoned like so many dreams he'd buried in the sand. The rope hanging from the ancient mesquite tree caught his attention first, swaying gently in the hot breeze. As he drew closer, his heart lurched at the sight of the small figure suspended there. A young Apache girl, no more than 16, hung limply from the makeshift noose, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders like a dark waterfall. Ethan spurred his horse forward, his pulse racing as he reached for his knife. "Easy there, little one," he whispered, though she appeared unconscious. He cut the rope with one swift motion, catching her slight frame as she fell. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and he could feel the faint flutter of her pulse against his wrist. Dark bruises marred her throat, and her traditional Apache dress was torn and stained with dust and blood. Ethan cradled her carefully, noting the delicate features of her face, the high cheekbones and full lips that spoke of her heritage. She was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, untamed and fierce even in unconsciousness. He had no idea who had done this to her or why, but something deep in his chest stirred with protective anger. He made camp there beneath the mesquite tree, unwilling to move her until she regained consciousness. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the girl's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of rich earth, dark and wary as they focused on his face. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged from her damaged throat. Ethan offered her water from his canteen, supporting her head as she drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was intelligence there and caution, but also a spark of defiance that impressed him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "My name's Ethan Cole. I found you hanging from that tree." He gestured toward the mesquite, and she followed his gaze, her hand instinctively moving to her bruised throat. She tried to speak again, and this time he caught fragments of Apache words mixed with broken English. He understood enough to know she was thanking him, and something else, something about her family being gone, all gone. The pain in her voice cut through him like a blade. Over the next few days, as they traveled slowly toward his ranch, Ethan learned pieces of her story. Her people had been attacked by cavalry soldiers and local ranchers in a dispute over water rights. She had watched her family slaughtered, her village burned, before being captured and tortured. The hanging had been their final cruel entertainment before they planned to leave her for the buzzards. "Anya," she told him one evening as they sat by their small campfire. "My name, Anya." Her voice was still hoarse from the rope burn, but it was musical despite the damage, lilting with the cadences of her native tongue. "Anya," Ethan repeated, tasting the name. It suited her, strong and beautiful like she was. "That's a good name, a strong name." She nodded, pulling the blanket he'd given her closer around her shoulders. The desert nights were cold, and she was still weak from her ordeal. Ethan found himself watching her constantly, marveling at her resilience. Despite everything she'd endured, there was an unbroken spirit in her that reminded him of the wild horses that roamed these lands, scarred but not conquered. As they rode, Anya began to open up more, sharing fragments of her life before the massacre. She had been learning the old ways from her grandmother, the healing arts and the sacred stories passed down through generations. She spoke of riding horses across the mesas, of summers spent gathering berries and roots, of winter nights filled with storytelling and laughter. Ethan found himself sharing his own past in return. He told her about his wife, Sarah, who had died of fever 3 winters ago, leaving him alone on the ranch they had built together. He spoke of the dreams they'd had, children running through the house, cattle grazing in green pastures, a life full of hope and promise. All of it had died with Sarah, leaving him hollow and drifting like tumbleweeds across the desert. "We both carry ghosts," Anya said one evening, her English improving daily. "But ghosts cannot hurt us if we do not let them." Her words stirred something in Ethan that had been dormant for years. Here was this young woman who had lost everything, yet she spoke of healing and moving forward. Her strength humbled him and made him want to be better, to be worthy of the trust she was slowly placing in him. When they finally reached his ranch, Ethan saw it through her eyes, the small adobe house with its red tile roof, the corrals and outbuildings weathered by time and neglect, the well that Sarah had insisted on digging near the kitchen garden she'd never lived to see flourish. It wasn't much, but it was home, and for the first time in years he felt a spark of pride in it. Anya moved through the house like a cautious deer, touching surfaces lightly, examining everything with curious eyes. She paused at the photograph of Sarah on the mantelpiece, studying the image of the blonde woman in her wedding dress. "She was beautiful," Anya said quietly. "You loved her very much." "I did," Ethan admitted, "but she's gone now, has been for a long time." Anya nodded, understanding flickering in her dark eyes. "Love does not die with the body," she said, "but neither should the heart stop beating for the living." Her words hit him like a physical blow, cutting through the walls he'd built around his emotions. He turned away, busying himself with preparing a meal, but he could feel her watching him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Anya proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, helping with the daily chores and bringing life back to the neglected homestead. She planted herbs and vegetables in Sarah's old garden, coaxing green shoots from the stubborn desert soil. She mended clothes and curtains, swept floors, and prepared meals that filled the house with unfamiliar but wonderful aromas. More importantly, she began to heal physically and emotionally. The bruises on her throat faded, and her voice grew stronger. She laughed more often, especially when Ethan told her stories of his younger days or when she tried to teach him words in Apache. Her presence transformed the lonely ranch house into something that felt like a home again. But their peace was shattered one afternoon when Lieutenant Morrison arrived with a small patrol of cavalry soldiers. Ethan had been mending fence when he saw the dust cloud approaching, and his blood ran cold when he recognized the officer's uniform. Morrison was a thin, sharp-faced man with pale eyes that reminded Ethan of a snake's. He'd had dealings with the lieutenant before, never pleasant ones. Morrison had a reputation for cruelty toward the Apache and anyone who showed them sympathy. "Afternoon, Cole," Morrison said, not bothering to dismount. "Heard you might have something that belongs to the territory." "Don't know what you mean," Ethan replied evenly, though his hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt. "Apache girl, young one. We had her in custody a few weeks back, but she escaped before we could finish questioning her." Morrison's smile was cold and predatory. "Some of my men are mighty disappointed they didn't get to complete their work." Ethan's jaw tightened. Haven't seen any Apache girls around here, Lieutenant. You might want to look elsewhere. That's so. Morrison's gaze swept over the ranch, taking in the signs of renewed habitation, the garden, the mended fences, the clean windows. Funny thing is, we tracked her this far before losing the trail. Real convenient how it just disappeared right around your property line. Lot of things disappear in the desert, Ethan said. Tracks get covered by wind and sand. You know how it is. Morrison's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Anya appeared in the doorway of the house. She'd heard the voices and come to investigate, despite Ethan's earlier warnings to stay hidden if soldiers ever came around. She stood there in the simple dress he'd bought her in town, her long hair braided back, looking for all the world like any settler woman. But her heritage was unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. Well, Morrison drawled, his hand moving to his sidearm. Looks like we found what we were looking for after all. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between the lieutenant and Anya. She's under my protection now, he said quietly. She's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong, Morrison laughed harshly. She's Apache, Cole. That's crime enough in this territory. And harboring a fugitive Indian, well, that could be seen as treason against the United States government. She's not a fugitive, Ethan replied. She's a survivor, and if you have a problem with that, you'll have to go through me. The tension stretched between them like a taut wire, each man measuring the other. Morrison's patrol shifted restlessly in their saddles, hands moving toward their weapons. Ethan could feel Anya's presence behind him, could sense her fear despite her outward calm. You're making a mistake, Cole, Morrison said finally. This won't end here. I'll be back, and next time I won't be alone. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the desert, his men following. But his parting words carried the weight of a promise, and Ethan knew they would indeed return, probably in greater numbers and with darker intentions. That night, as they sat by the fire, Anya spoke quietly. I should go, she said. My presence here puts you in danger. You have been kind to me, more than kind, but I will not be the cause of your destruction. Ethan looked at her across the flickering flames, seeing the resolve in her eyes and the pain behind it. Where would you go? He asked. Your people are scattered or dead. You have no family left, no tribe to take you in. I will find a way, she said simply. I survived before you found me. I can survive again. Maybe, Ethan said, but you shouldn't have to. This is your home now if you want it to be, and I meant what I told Morrison. You're under my protection. Tears gathered in her eyes, catching the firelight like stars. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because, he said, you've brought light back into a very dark place. Because you've reminded me what it feels like to care about something again. Because, he met her eyes across the fire. Because somewhere along the way I started falling in love with you. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they dared to cross. Anya's breath caught, and she searched his face for any sign of deception or casual intent. But all she found was honesty and a vulnerability that made her heart race. Ethan, she said softly, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. I feel the same, but how can we? You are white, I am Apache. The world will not accept us. The world can go to hell, Ethan said fiercely. What matters is what we feel, what we choose to build together. Everything else is just noise. She rose from her place by the fire and moved to sit beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. Then we build it together, she said. Whatever comes, we face it together. But facing it together proved more difficult than either had imagined. Word of Anya's presence at the ranch had spread, and soon Ethan found himself ostracized by the other ranchers in the area. Men who had once been cordial now crossed the street to avoid him in town. Supplies became harder to obtain, and several times he found his cattle with mysterious injuries or his fences cut during the night. The harassment escalated one evening when a group of local ranchers, led by a man named Briggs, rode up to the house. Briggs was a large, brutal man who owned the biggest spread in the area and had long resented Ethan's prime water rights. "Cole," Briggs shouted from horseback, "come on out here, we need to have a talk." Ethan emerged from the house, Anya close behind him despite his gesture for her to stay inside. He could see the whiskey on the men's faces, could smell the violence in the air like the scent of an approaching storm. "Evening, Briggs," Ethan said calmly. "What brings you by?" "You know damn well what brings us by," Briggs spat. "That savage you got living in there, you think you can just thumb your nose at decent folks harboring a murdering Apache." "She's never murdered anyone," Ethan replied. "She's the one who was nearly murdered." "Don't matter," another rancher called out. "Apache is Apache. They killed my brother at Canyon Creek. String 'em all up, I say." "Get off my land," Ethan said quietly, but his voice carried the authority of a man who would back up his words with action. "Or what?" Briggs laughed. "You'll shoot us all. There's 6 of us, Cole, and only 1 of you." "2 of us," Anya said, stepping forward with Ethan's spare rifle in her hands. She held it with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to hunt as a child. "And I am a very good shot." The sight of an Apache woman holding a weapon sobered the drunken ranchers somewhat. They shifted uneasily in their saddles, suddenly remembering stories of Apache warriors and their legendary fighting skills. "This ain't over, Cole," Briggs said finally. "You got a choice to make, her or your neighbors. Can't have both." "Then I choose her," Ethan said without hesitation. "Every time." The ranchers rode off into the night, but their threats lingered like smoke in the air. Ethan knew they would be back, and probably with Morrison and his soldiers. The noose was tightening around them, and soon they would have to make a choice: fight or flee. The decision was made for them 3 nights later when the attack came. Ethan woke to the sound of breaking glass and the acrid smell of smoke. The barn was already engulfed in flames, and he could see shadowy figures moving around the house in the flickering orange light. "Anya," he shouted, reaching for his guns. "Get to the root cellar." But as he turned, he saw her standing in the bedroom doorway, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Behind her stood Morrison, his service revolver pressed to her temple. "Drop your weapons, Cole," the lieutenant ordered. "Nice and slow, or the squaw gets a bullet in the brain." Ethan's hands stilled on his gun belt. He could see the madness in Morrison's eyes, the kind of cruel enjoyment that came from having absolute power over another person's life. This was the same expression the man must have worn when he'd ordered Anya's torture. "Let her go, Morrison," Ethan said carefully. "Your quarrel is with me." "Oh, my quarrel is with both of you now," Morrison replied. "You've made me look foolish, Cole, cost me face with my superiors. That can't be allowed to stand." More soldiers appeared in the doorway, their weapons trained on Ethan. Behind them he could see the flames from the barn growing higher, casting wild shadows on the walls of the house that had been his and Sarah's dream, and then his and Anya's refuge. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison continued. "You're going to watch while my men have some fun with your Apache whore. Then we're going to string you both up from that same tree where we left her before. Poetic justice, don't you think?" Rage exploded in Ethan's chest, a red-hot fury that made him forget caution and common sense. He lunged forward, not for his guns but directly at Morrison. The lieutenant's eyes widened in surprise, and his shot went wide as Ethan's shoulder slammed into his chest. They crashed to the floor together, Morrison's gun spinning away into the darkness. Anya threw herself sideways, rolling toward the fallen weapon as the soldiers in the doorway hesitated, afraid to shoot with their officer grappling with their target. The fight was brief but vicious. Morrison was younger, but Ethan was stronger and fueled by desperate love. His fists connected with the lieutenant's face again and again, driven by months of pent-up fury and the memory of Anya's bruised throat. But then one of the soldiers found his courage and pulled the trigger. The bullet took Ethan high in the chest, spinning him away from Morrison and sending him crashing into the wall. He slumped there, blood spreading across his shirt, his vision graying at the edges. Ethan. Anya's cry was pure anguish. She had Morrison's gun now and was aiming it at the soldiers, but they had her outnumbered and outgunned. "Kill them both," Morrison gasped, struggling to his feet with blood streaming from his nose. "Make it look like they died in the fire." But as the soldiers raised their weapons, the night erupted with new sounds, war cries and gunshots from outside the house. Through the windows came the flash of muzzle fire and the thunder of hoofbeats. Morrison's men outside were shouting in alarm and confusion. "What the hell?" Morrison began, but his words were cut off by a rifle shot that shattered the window behind him. More shots followed, and suddenly the house was full of Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons gleaming in the firelight. The cavalry soldiers stood no chance. Caught between the warriors outside and those now pouring through the windows, they were overwhelmed in moments. Morrison tried to run but was brought down before he reached the door, a tomahawk catching him between the shoulder blades. As suddenly as it had begun, the violence was over. The house fell silent except for the crackling of flames from the burning barn and Ethan's labored breathing. An elderly Apache warrior approached Anya, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. Anya responded, gesturing toward Ethan, and the old warrior nodded gravely. Other warriors moved to help, lifting Ethan carefully and carrying him outside where the cool night air helped clear his vision slightly. "Who?" Ethan struggled to speak through the pain in his chest. "How?" "My grandfather's brother," Anya explained, kneeling beside him as the warriors worked to stop his bleeding. "He survived the massacre, escaped with a few others. They have been tracking Morrison's patrol for days, waiting for the right moment to strike." The old warrior spoke again, and Anya translated. "He says they heard about the white man who saved an Apache girl. He says such courage deserves to be rewarded, not punished." Ethan tried to smile, but the effort sent new waves of pain through his chest. The bullet was still lodged there, and he could feel his strength ebbing with each heartbeat. Tell him I'm honored." The Apache warriors worked through the night, tending Ethan's wounds with traditional remedies, while others dealt with the bodies of the soldiers and put out the fire before it could spread to the house. By dawn, the immediate danger was past, but Ethan's condition remained critical. For 3 days he drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams, his life hanging by a thread. Anya never left his side, using every healing technique her grandmother had taught her, mixing Apache remedies with what little medical supplies they had. The old warriors chanted healing songs and burned sacred herbs, calling on the spirits to spare the life of the white man who had shown such kindness to their people. On the 4th day, Ethan's fever broke. He opened his eyes to find Anya sleeping in the chair beside his bed, her hand clasped in his. She looked exhausted, her face drawn with worry and sleepless nights, but she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Anya," he whispered, and her eyes snapped open immediately. "Ethan," she leaned forward, pressing her free hand to his forehead, checking for fever. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he said with a weak smile, "but alive, thanks to you." Tears streamed down her face as she bent to kiss him gently. "I thought I had lost you," she whispered against his lips. "I thought I would be alone again." "Never," he promised, his arms coming up to hold her despite the pain in his chest. "Never again." The Apache warriors stayed for another week, helping them rebuild what had been destroyed and ensuring that no more soldiers or hostile ranchers would come calling. Word had spread quickly through the territory about the massacre of Morrison's patrol, and the official story was that they had been killed by hostile Apaches while pursuing horse thieves. No one connected the deaths to Ethan Cole or the girl he harbored. When the warriors finally prepared to leave for the deep desert where they planned to join other surviving bands, the old chief spoke privately with Anya. Ethan watched from the porch, still weak but recovering, as the two conversed in rapid Apache. "He wants us to come with them," Anya explained later. "He says there will always be danger for us here, that the white man's hatred runs too deep." "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. He could see the longing in her eyes, the pull of her people and her heritage. "I want to be with you," she said simply. "But I also want to be free. I want our children to grow up without fear, without having to hide who they are or where they come from." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. The ranch had been his dream with Sarah, but Sarah was gone, and this was a new life requiring new dreams. "Then we go," he said. "We make a new home somewhere else, somewhere we can be together without looking over our shoulders." They left the ranch 2 days later, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Ethan felt no sadness as he looked back at the adobe house for the last time. It had served its purpose, given them shelter when they needed it most, but it was not their future. They traveled north with the Apache band for several weeks before finally parting ways at a river crossing where the old chief pointed them toward a distant valley he said was blessed by the spirits. It was isolated, protected by high mesas and hidden canyons, with good water and grass for horses and cattle. Few white men know of this place. He told them through Anya's translation. "Those who do respect the old ways and will not trouble you. You can build a new life there, raise children who know both worlds but belong fully to neither and therefore to both." The valley was everything the old chief had promised and more. A clear stream ran through its center, fed by springs high in the surrounding cliffs. Grass grew thick and green, and there were stands of cottonwood and oak that would provide building material and fuel. Game was plentiful, and the soil looked rich enough for farming. They built their new home slowly, savoring each day of the construction as they had never been able to savor the work on the old ranch. This was truly theirs, unmarked by memories of other loves or other lives. The house they raised was a blend of cultures, like their Union adobe walls in the Mexican style, but with a peaked roof for the mountain weather, and windows placed to catch both the sunrise and sunset. As autumn turned to winter, Anya began to notice changes in her body. The morning sickness came first, followed by the familiar signs that every woman recognizes. When she told Ethan, his joy was so complete and overwhelming that he wept openly, holding her in his arms as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Spring brought new life to the valley in more ways than one. As Anya's pregnancy progressed, they received occasional visitors, other outcasts and seekers who had heard whispers of the peaceful valley hidden in the high country. A few Mexican farmers fleeing revolution in the south. A former slave and his family seeking a place where the color of their skin mattered less than the content of their character. An old trapper who had lived among the Crow for so many years. He was more Indian than white. Each group was welcomed and given space to build their own lives while respecting the isolation that protected them all. The valley began to feel like what Ethan had always dreamed of, a true community based on mutual respect rather than shared prejudice. The baby was born on a warm day in late summer when the meadows were golden with wildflowers, and the air was sweet with the scent of pine and sage. Anya's labor was long but not difficult, attended by the Mexican farmer's wife, who had delivered many children, and the old trapper, who had learned healing skills from his Crow friends. When Ethan first held his son, for it was a boy, dark-haired like his mother, but with his father's blue eyes, he felt a completion he had never imagined possible. This child would grow up free, knowing love without limits, understanding both the white world and the Apache world without being trapped by the hatred between them. "What will we call him?" Anya asked as she nursed their son for the first time. Ethan looked out the window at the valley they had claimed and tamed and made into home. "Samuel," he said finally. "Samuel Cole, after my grandfather, who used to tell me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns but by what he's willing to sacrifice for love." Anya smiled, testing the name. "Samuel, yes. Samuel Cole. It is a good name for a free man." As the sun set over their hidden valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled the desert sunsets they had both known and left behind, Ethan Cole held his wife and son and felt the last of his old ghosts finally laid to rest. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain as all futures were, but bright with possibility and unmarked by the hatred and prejudice of the outside world. They had found their peace at last, and in finding it, had created something new and precious, a love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose, a family that belonged to itself alone, and a home that existed not in any particular place, but in the space they created together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one heartbeat at a time.